So, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Arcserve webinar. My name is Armin Jihanian. I'm the pre-sales consultant for Arcserve, and in today's session, we'll be taking a look at the new features in Arcserve UDP 6.5. Specifically, we're going to take a look at a handful of the new features, and along with talking about what they are, show a bit of a demo on how they work within the product. Before we get started, I do want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording link available afterwards. Also, if there are any questions during the session, please feel free to type those questions in the chat or the questions panel, and we will have some time at the end to go through those questions. With that, during today's session, we'll have a quick overview of the UDP solution. We'll take a look at a summary of all the new features or the main features that have been introduced. And then we're going to take a look in detail for these particular features. We're going to look at the file share or the UNC path backup capability introduced in UDP 6.5. We're going to take a look at the Office 365 Exchange Online backup. We'll take a look at how we can configure auto discovery and auto protection of VMware VMs. And we're going to take a look at the assured recovery testing and the SLA reports in 6.5 that have been introduced. So let's take a quick overview of UDP. For those of you who have been using UDP for a number of years, this is probably not going to be all that new. But essentially what UDP stands for is Unified Data Protection. The unified part comes in the bringing together of what we had previously as completely separate offerings. We had Arcserve Backup, which is our traditional file-based backup, which typically went to tape, but we also supported disk and cloud destinations as well. We also bring together Arcserve RHA, replication and high availability. So this is a good differentiator for us in the market in that we can provide not only point-in-time recovery, but near synchronous and near real-time failover and high availability for critical systems. And of course, the core of UDP, which is our block-based volume-level backup, which was formerly the Arcserve D2D product. So that's what it was based on. We bring together these three separate products into the unified architecture to be able to provide protection for both physical and virtual machines. Through a unified console, we can provide this protection, and one of the key components to provide the plethora of features and capabilities in UDP is the recovery point server, or the RPS for short. With the recovery point server, which is based on a Windows server, we can provide global deduplication for backups, and then once we have recovery points or backups in the RPS, we can then perform additional features such as replication, instant VM, copy to tape, and more. From a design perspective, there's a few different components to UDP, and we can scale according to what the customer requirements are. We can start with a basic UDP agent installed on a physical server. We can also install it on a virtual machine if need be, and that provides backup going to a NAS, like a file share, or maybe to a USB drive or separate hard drive. These backups can be compressed and encrypted, and if you have multiple machines, we can deploy the agents on each of those and configure them and have the backups go to that NAS or hard drive. Now, if we start having more than half a dozen servers, doing this manually can become time-consuming and a bit cumbersome. So what we can do is add a UDP console. The UDP console gives us central management and reporting. It lets us create plans in one location and have those plans pushed out to the agents on the machines that we're managing. If we add additional servers, we can also push the agent out to these servers through the console, again, making it easier for us to look after a site that has more servers. Furthermore, by having a UDP console, it lets us protect virtual machines using an agentless method. So we can protect VMware and Hyper-V VMs through the use of proxies, and we can protect the VMs on these hypervisor platforms without having to deploy an agent in each of the VMs. Backups are still going to a NAS drive, for example, or a file share. And on top of that, it gives us the capability to do virtual standby. Virtual standby takes a backup image and creates a powered off VM inside the hypervisor, either Hyper-V or VMware. So if our source machine were to fail for any reason, we can, at the click of a button, turn that VM on, and we have a consistent server image ready to run based on that last backup that was available. Now, before I mention the real differentiator and the key component for us is the recovery point server. Again, the recovery point server is a Windows-based machine, and in this diagram, the console and the recovery point server are shown separately. That's more for the diagram purposes. But we can have the console and the RPS on the same machine with both of those roles. So when we add a recovery point server into the solution, what we can then do is add additional sources for backup. We can set up a data store or multiple data stores where the backups are going to be kept, and that can be an internal disk, that can be a SAN-based disk, it can be a NAS, and then the additional sources we can protect include the file share and the exchange online that we're going to take a look at in more detail in just a moment. Furthermore, once we've got our backups in the recovery point server data store, we can perform additional functions. The data store itself can be deduplicated, so we can reduce the footprint needed when we're storing our backups. We still have compression and encryption options. We keep the ability to do that virtual standby where we convert the backup images, but we also get instant VM. With instant VM, we can pick any recovery point and create a virtual machine from it without having to do a conversion up front. We use a combination of the recovery point or the backup itself as the main source, and any changes are written to a differencing disk, and the use of both of these sources allows us to access and use a VM immediately. If you've got the backups or the recovery points in the data store, we can also perform an offload or a copy to tape. This copy to tape is a full backup, and typically this is useful for providing full backups, maybe monthly or quarterly, and then you can have them stored off-site, and these can be used to meet compliance or regulatory requirements. We can add additional recovery point servers, and we can replicate from one recovery point server to another. And the important thing to note here is, from a licensing, Arcserve licensing standpoint, the use of additional recovery point servers doesn't require any additional cost from Arcserve. As long as you can provision that Windows server and the storage behind it, you can have multiple copies of your data for no additional Arcserve licensing cost. When you replicate recovery points, and if you have a remote hypervisor, we can perform that virtual standby and instant VM capability on that remote hypervisor as well. And similarly, we can do a copy to tape at the remote site. So if you have a host, or if you have a lot of remote offices or branch offices, you can have all of those do local backups to their RPS on site, have all those recovery point servers or RPSs replicate back to a central one, and then from there you can do your copy to tape centrally. So you can eliminate the need for non-IT staff having to perform tasks such as replacing or rotating tapes. That's a very high-level look at how the design of UDP works. We have some additional detail in webinars we've held in the past. And we have a basic series which covers the agent, console, and recovery point service separately. And then we have a feature series that goes through some restore capabilities, how we can do replication, virtual standby, instant VM, and some of the cloud and tape integration we have. So the links are up there. As I said, this webinar will be recorded. So if you want to watch those at a later time and go into a little bit more detail, you're welcome to do that. So let's take a look and go through some of the new features available in UDP 6.5. The new features that have been introduced can broadly be categorized in three main areas. We can have new features in fortified data availability, we have some additional cloud integration, and we've added some capabilities in reporting and orchestration. So what does that mean? Let's take a look at this fortified data availability. In Arcserve UDP version 6.0, which we launched last year, we introduced the ability to do hardware snapshots. Throughout the updates available in version 6, we've been adding some support for additional vendors, and in 6.5 we further added support for HPE 3-path storage arrays, and we've expanded the support for nimble storage arrays. So for both of these platforms we can provide hardware snapshot capability for backups for both agent-based and agentless VM backups for both Hyper-V and VMware. We can provide Office 365 Exchange Online backup. So as more and more workloads are moving into the cloud and using cloud-based services, it's great for reducing the overhead and management complexity for on-site, but it doesn't necessarily solve the data protection issue. So with the ability to provide backups for the Exchange Online mailboxes, you can again provide either business level policy backups and protection, or compliance and regulatory fulfill regulatory requirements by doing backups of those mailboxes online. We've added the ability to do backups of file shares from UNC paths. So this might be, you might have a file server and you don't want to do an entire backup of all the volumes. You might only want to provide a backup or perform a backup of particular shares. Or perhaps in a smaller environment, you have a NAS box, maybe a QNAP or Synology or something similar, which doesn't have the capability of having an agent installed on it. So with this backup from UNC path capability, we can do those backups using a recovery point server as the destination. So again, we're going to take a look at this in a bit more detail a little later on. And of course, we've added new certifications, added support for Windows Server 2016, v6.5, added the updated versions of different Linux distributions, as well as providing support for the Oracle Unbreakable kernel. We did have support for Oracle Linux previously, but using the Red Hat kernel. So now we can provide support for both the Red Hat and the Unbreakable kernel. Moving to cloud integration, we've added a few more features here as well. So we have now the ability to do a copy of a recovery point direct into cloud, specifically into AWS S3. So if you need to perform off-site retention of particular recovery points, we can take it out of our infinite incrementals, make it a standalone recovery point, and store it in the cloud. If you then need to do a system restore, we can pull that recovery point out of the cloud so that you can do your on-prem restore. In terms of restoration into EC2, we can do that now as well. So we've added some enhancements on protecting EC2 instances. I mean, we could always do that with UDP, but we've added some additional enhancements around that, particularly around the restoration of VMs into Amazon AWS EC2. So for Linux systems, we can perform instant VM restores into AWS. So if you have a backup of a Linux machine, we can then create an EC2 instance and do a restore. For Windows, we've added the ability to do virtual standby. So the same virtual standby that we have for on-prem, where we're doing a conversion and creating an instance and having it in a powered off state ready to turn on, we can do a similar thing into AWS EC2 as well now. What this essentially means is that from a DR or remote DR site perspective, it makes using AWS a bit more of a comprehensive tool and a viable way to use it as a DR site. Lastly, from a reporting and orchestration standpoint, a very big feature we've added is the ability to do assured recovery testing. What this is the ability to take a backup image that was made and either create an instant VM or a virtual disk and then run some custom scripts to test it, make sure the data on it is accessible, is readable, and all of this can be done automatically as part of a plan. This ties into the new SLA reports that we have, and we can set different SLA profiles. So you might say that for particular servers, I need to be able to do a file restore within so many minutes or hours. You might define that you need to do a bare metal full system restore in a certain amount of time. You might need to do a VM restore or an instant VM in a certain amount of time. You can specify what those times are within an SLA profile and apply them to particular servers. And then when you do these tests on restores, they'll be timed and compared against what the profile says. And in the dashboard, which we'll take a look at in a moment, you can see whether the SLA profile has been met or if it's been breached. We also have a host of other enhancements. I'm not going to go through all of these right now, but there has been a host of enhancements and improvements done, not only in the back end, but also within the interface, being able to have a bit more control when you're creating virtual standby or instant VM in VMware, creating, restarting jobs from failed jobs, being able to do file level restores of VMs without having to load an agent into the VM, and so on. So let's start by taking a look at how the file share or the UNC path backup works. With Arcserve UDP, we've traditionally had to do agent or agentless backups, but at a block level on local drive. As we know, with file shares, it's a file level access. So the way we're able to use our infinite incremental technology so that we only need to do one full and then we only need to do incrementals after is through the use of a proxy machine. The proxy machine is running a Windows Server OS and it has our UDP agent installed. And that proxy can be the RPS or the console box, or it can be a separate machine altogether. From there, we can then send the backups to the recovery point server. And then once it's in the recovery point server, we can do the usual tasks such as replicating, doing copy to tape, and so on. The initial destination for the backups needs to be a simple non-dedupe data store, but we've also added the ability to do replication from one data store to another on the same RPS. So there's an optional feature that we can enable replication into a deduplicated data store so that we can get longer-term retention with the utilization of much less disk space. Obviously, from a restore perspective, we can restore the individual files, or we can actually mount those recovery points that we've made as a drive on a different machine through the agent. With that said, let's take a closer look. So I'm just going to open the Arcserve UDP console now. Just before I get into the file level or the file share backup, I do want to point out and go through the new dashboard. So again, those who have used UDP 5 update 3 onwards, or UDP version 6, you'll notice that the dashboard that's here is a little different now. This new dashboard still has your backup status, so we have the pie chart here that shows you if you've had successful, failed, cancelled backups and so on. What we do have here though is something different, is the consolidation of the actual backup and the restorable data backup graphs onto a single graph. So this might be a bit confusing to look at up front, but what this graph says, let's take the middle line first. If I was to do an actual, just a raw backup of all my servers, that's going to be about 17 terabytes worth of backup. However, each backup that I do, even though I'm doing incrementals after the initial full, will allow me to restore the entire contents that fills the drive. So if I was to restore every single recovery point I had, I would be able to restore just under 47.5 terabytes worth of data. However, because of the deduplication and compression that is used by UDP, on disk, I'm only using a little over 3 terabytes of hard disk space. So I'm getting, 83% reduction in that data set through the use of Arcserve UDP. From an additional new components in the dashboard, on the far right we have the recovery point objective dashboard. This simply shows how many recovery points I have based on time. So the first one shows how many per month. The middle one shows the age of the newest recovery point. So you can see here I don't have any recovery points or backups that were made in the last 15 minutes. I don't have any that were made in the last hour. But I do have 14 that were made between 1 hour and 1 day ago. And then I have an additional 7 recovery points that were made between 1 and 7 days ago. They're the newest ones that were taken. The oldest recovery points are listed here as well. So you can see here I have a low number of recovery points in the last 30 days. That's the oldest. I have some that have their oldest recovery point between 1 and 6 months. The bulk of my servers have their oldest backup within the last year. So that would make sense if I have a 12-month retention for monthlies, for example. And then I have some more in the older category further there. Here underneath, I have the RTO dashboard, the recovery time objective dashboard. And this is where, after I do a particular restore test, the console is timing it, and it will see whether it has met or hasn't met the SLA profile that I defined. And then underneath, you can see here that I've got some servers that don't have a profile defined, and I haven't tested some either. You can even see that in the bare metal restore, where since installing UDP 6.5, I haven't actually performed a bare metal restore in my lab here. I've done assured recovery tests, virtual machine recoveries, instant VMs and file restores, and these are shown with these graphs here. With that said, let's now go take a look at the file share backup. So just as before, most of our configuration and setup is done in this resources tab. When we click on that, by default we're going to see all the nodes, which are the backup sources. And in my lab I have a mix of some Windows, Linux machines, servers, desktops, physical, virtual, a whole host of different types of machines. If I want to do a backup of a share though, what I can do is go straight to creating a plan so that I can protect the share. So to do that, I'm going to click on all plans here in the left. And again, you can see I already have a number of plans that have already been defined. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Add a Plan, and we'll go through and create one from scratch. So I'm going to call this UNC Path Backup Demo Plan, just to give it a bit of a descriptive name. And in the task type, if you've used UDP 6 or earlier, you'll notice that we have a few extra options in here. So what I'm going to choose is files on a UNC path. When I select this, the first thing I need to do is define a proxy. So the proxy is going to be a Windows Server machine running 2008 R2 or later with the UDP agent installed. And as I said, you don't have to provision a completely new server just to do this. We can use the RPS, which is what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use RPS1. I already have my agent on there when I installed the RPS role. I'm going to now click on Add, and I'm going to define what path I want to protect. I'm going to click on Add UNC Path. Now I have a QNAP box that has a USB hard disk plugged into it. So I'm going to connect to that. I'm going to put this path in. I'm going to hit the green arrow, and I'm going to provide my credentials to connect to this particular share. So now this is the top level of the share. If I want to, I can back this up completely, and it will back up all of these folders. However, I don't want to back everything up here. I just want to back up this folder, which I've called Demo Share, and it has some folders that I've created for this demo. I'm going to select that. So I've selected this particular share, and I can hit Save. If I wanted to add another path, I could do that. I can just click on Add UNC Path, and I can go through that process again. Additionally, when we're doing backups of file shares, we have the option to exclude particular files. So we can do exclusions based on file or folder name, including file types and extensions. We can choose to exclude files larger than a certain size, and we can choose to exclude files created or modified before a certain date. So if you only want to back up new files, you can leave the older ones behind. I'm going to leave it all. I'm going to include everything, so I'm not going to exclude anything for this demo. I'm going to go to destination, and the destination must be a recovery point server, and it must be a recovery point server with a non-deduplicated data store. So in this example, it's defaulted to my RPS1, which has this data store that I've created, and just my naming convention, I put ND at the end to tell me that this is a non-dedupe data store. And in fact, if I try to pick a different data store, it doesn't give me an option. If I had a recovery point server that did not have a non-dedupe data store, such as my second recovery point server, if I select RPS2, this RPS only has one deduplicated data store. And so it's giving me a warning that I need to have a non-dedupe data store. There will be an update coming later that will allow us to do backup directly into dedupe data stores. But at this stage, I can select my non-dedupe data store, and I can provide a password if I want to, or if it was encrypted, I'd provide the encryption password. And then I can go to Schedule. So here I'm going to select how often I want a backup to run. So I want a daily backup to run Monday through to Thursday. That can run at 10 p.m. They can be incrementals. And the first backup will automatically be a full, and then afterwards they'll revert to incrementals. But if I want to do weekly backups as well, I can click on Add. I'll add my backup schedule and choose weekly. That can be run on Fridays, that's fine. And then maybe I want to do monthlies as well. So I can add a backup schedule and choose monthly, and I can choose to do that on the last day of the month at 10 p.m. Save. Now here underneath, I can choose what retention I want to keep for each of these types of backups. But because this is going to a non-dedupe data store, I don't want it to use a lot of disk space. What I can do is I can reduce the retention of these down to 1, and then I can do a replication from this non-dedupe data store into a dedupe data store. And I can choose to have a longer retention in the dedupe data store. So we'll see how that works in just a moment. So I've added these in. If I need to do cataloging, if I'm doing a lot of searches, I want that search to be faster, I can catalog that. If I want to do copy to tape, I need to catalog that. But for now, I'm happy with this. I'm going to go to advanced where I can run pre-post scripts, or I can enable email alerts. Again, I'm going to leave that blank for now. And that's all I need to do, and I can hit save on that, and that will do the backup of the share. Just before I hit save, let's take a look at how we can also do the replication. I'll click on add a task, and we've got task 2, which is now going to be, from the drop-down, I'm going to replicate. You'll also notice there are other tasks I can do, such as assured recovery test, copy to tape, and so on. For now, I'm going to pick replicate. And the source is going to be the backup from task 1, but now I can choose where the destination is. And with UDP version 6.5, I can replicate to a different data store on the same RPS, or I can replicate to a different RPS. So I have both RPSs in my drop-down available. In this case, I want it to go to the same RPS, but I want it to go to my deduplicated data store. So this is the one that I've called a DD on the end for dedupe. Have the settings for timeouts and so on, and then I can go to schedule. By default, the schedule is blank, which means that it will immediately replicate after the backup completes. So this hasn't changed from previous versions of UDP. If I want to put a replication schedule in, I can click add, and I can do that. If I wanted to throttle the bandwidth, if this was going to a different RPS across a WAN, for example, I could choose to throttle the replication. But for now, in this demo, I'll leave those blank. And here is where I can specify my retention. Now, I'm doing a daily backup, but I want to keep 2 weeks worth of backups. My dailies run Monday to Thursday, so I've got 4 backups a week. To protect 2 weeks of dailies, I need to have a retention of 8. I'm doing weekly backups, and I want 1 month's retention, so I'll have 5 on that. And then I want 1 year's worth of monthly, so I'll leave those as 12. I then have custom manual backups. So if I do any ad hoc backups, or if I decided to put a policy in place where I do backups every so many minutes or hours, I could choose to keep those as well. For now, I'm happy to keep that down to 1. And then lastly, under advanced, I have options for enabling email alerts here. Now I can hit save, and it'll push the settings out to the proxy, which has the agent, in this case the RPS itself. And that will go through and be successful. There it is. If I go back to my all nodes, I now have my new NAS share in the node list. This is a new source. It has an exclamation mark because the first backup hasn't run yet. So I can right-click on that, and I can choose to say backup now if I want. And I'll kick that off. And in a moment, that will see a spinning wheel next to this job to indicate that the backup is running. There it is. And if I now click on the Jobs tab, I can see that it is going to be a full backup, even though I said incremental, because, in this case, I've already done a backup. I'll click Details, and it's doing a backup there. I did a backup when I went through a rehearsal for this webinar, so it's done an incremental. But you can see there, the incremental is relatively quick. I'll go back to the Resources tab. And we'll just give that a little bit of time to complete. In the meantime, if we wanted to do a restore from a share, we can do that a few different ways. So because I've already done a backup from this path before, I can just right-click and I can say restore. This will open the agent on the proxy. And again, if you've used UDP before, we can just do a restore using the restore wizard, or we can mount the recovery point. So in this case, it's looking for the non-dedupe data store, but if I change this, I can point this to my deduplicated data store, which has the longer retention. And just let that connect. So there's my share. Oops. So there's the non-dedupe data store. I want to change this to my deduplicated data store. And you can see here I have a lot more machines that are backed up within this deduplicated data store. So if I go through and find my share, there it is. No, that's not it. The replication is actually running now. But I can find my share. Let's just pick the one on the non-dedupe. And then there is the backup that we made. So that's today's date. I can expand this out. And then I can pick and choose folders or files within that share to restore. Maybe I want to restore the entire lot. Maybe I just want to restore these logs. So I can select the folder, or I can select the files within the folder. And I can go next. I can choose where I want to restore to, how I'm going to resolve the conflict. And maybe I want to restore it to a local folder. And go next. I have a summary of what's going to be restored, and when I hit finish, it'll restore those files. Alternatively, if I cancel this, I can mount the recovery point. So again, this is within the agent. If I click on Mount Recovery Point, there's the backup that we just ran. If I click on Mount, I can mount it as a drive letter, and then whichever machine I'm accessing the agent on, I can go into Windows Explorer, drag and drop files, use whatever tools, just like a normal backup with UDP. I'm just going to close that. Just before I move on, I just want to show you that we've got now replication happening. So if I go to the Jobs tab, we can see some more info. So we have 2 replication jobs, one going out of the non-dedupe data store and the replication in on the deduplicated data store. So that's going to run for a little bit. We'll let that keep going. The next thing we'll take a look at is the Exchange Online backup. So again, with Exchange Online, what we can do is protect the mailboxes running in Office 365, and this can help against accidental mail deletion or even malicious, deliberate mail deletion. And it goes one step above and beyond the legal hold that can be placed on Exchange Online. So by having backups of those emails, you can go back, take a look at what was there previously, so on, do restores back into the mailbox, into other mailboxes. And just like the file share, we do that through a proxy, and the initial destination is a non-dedupe data store with the option for us to replicate into a deduplicated data store. Once it's in the data store, we can then replicate it to another RPS, copy the tape, send it to cloud, and so on. Restoration is back into the Office 365 environment, and that can be from the recovery point, the primary location, or from a secondary replicated location. from a licensing perspective, in sites or environments that have a UDP per terabyte capacity-based license, the ability to back up Office 365 Exchange Online mailboxes is included and comes out of that capacity allotment. For environments where you have socket licenses or per OS licensing, we have a subscription license available for Exchange 365, Office 365 Exchange Online backup. So let's take a look at the Exchange Online backup. If I get my console back, we'll go back to the Resources tab, and we're going to go ahead and create a new plan. So I'll go to the Plan section, and I'm going to add a new plan here and call this Exchange Online Backup. The task type will be Office 365 Exchange Online. I'll select that. Just like the file share, I'll need to choose a proxy, and that can be the RPS. And then we're going to choose to add our mailboxes. So I just have a single standalone account within 365 with this particular mailbox. And hopefully I typed the password right. Yes, I did. So when you put that in, if you're the administrator and you can have access to, you see all the mailboxes that are there, what you could do is choose to back up the entire Exchange 365 source. So if any new accounts or mailboxes get added in, they'll automatically be protected as part of the plan. Alternatively, if you only want to protect particular mailboxes, you can go through and select them and add them into the protection list. So I've only got that one mailbox to show right now, so I just added that in. And then you have the option to choose to back up all the folders within that mailbox, or you can choose to exclude particular mailboxes. So maybe I don't want to back up the junk mail. Maybe I don't want to back up sync issues. So I can choose to exclude those. Or if I do want to have everything, I'll just select all folders. Destination is pretty much identical to the file share we saw before. We must go to a non-disruptive data store first. We can choose a schedule. Again, so we've got a daily schedule here. Maybe I don't want to do, or maybe I do want to do 7 days. But I want to replicate into my dedupe data store, so I'm going to reduce my retention down to 1. Under Advanced, I can do my script and email alert options. And just like before, I'll add a task and I'll replicate this. And I'll replicate this to my dedupe data store, and I'll have an increased retention. Maybe I want 28 days of daily. I want a month's retention. And I'm happy to do maybe 5 ad hoc or custom manual backups. Just like before, Advanced gives us email alert options. Once I'm happy with that, I'll hit Save. So now that's applying the settings to the agent on the proxy. That's successful. If I go to all nodes, I can see I now have that email address as a source. And it's got an exclamation mark because the backup hasn't run yet. I can right click and choose to backup now. So I've kicked that off. Again, in a few seconds, I should see a little spinning wheel next to that job. And if I go to the Jobs tab, there's my backup. Now, it can take a while for the initial backup to complete, and that's normal. But the benefit of this setup is once that initial full backup has been completed, we are only doing those incrementals thereafter. So we'll let that back up. From a restore perspective, I should have a previous backup that I've made available. So we right-click on it and click on Restore like we did with the file share before. And in this case, it's showing my non-dedupe data store, which is fine. But let's see if I've got a copy in my dedupe data store that I replicated into. So, okay, no, it's found the one that we've made. I'll go OK. No, I picked the wrong data store. My apologies. This is the dedupe data store. There it is. You can see I've done a backup in the past. So maybe I'll go to yesterday's backup. Yesterday's backup and go next. And then here we'll show the mailboxes that have been backed up. And so you can see the different folders that are available, and I can drill down and pick, maybe I'll go into my inbox. If I select that, I can see the emails. Maybe I'll choose which emails I want to restore. I can go next. Choose where I want to restore it to, the original location or to an alternate location. So I need to choose a different account and a destination path. So it'll put it into a timestamp folder. And you'll notice that you need to provide the credentials again because the proxy will be connecting into Office 365 to perform that restore. If I provide that, I'll go next. Okay, and then you have the summary, and if you hit finish, it will it'll then perform that restore. So that is a very whirlwind look at the Exchange Online Office 365 backup. Moving on to the auto protection of VMware VMs. So with UDP 6.5, we now have the ability to add a container object as a source in an agentless VM backup plan. Previously, we could only select the VMs themselves, but now we can choose a container, and the container can be something like a data center or a cluster, an individual ESXi server, a resource pool, or folders that are made within VMware. When new VMs are created within this container, they will automatically be detected and backed up using the policy within the plan that the container is in. If the VM is moved out of that container and moved to a different container, it will not be backed up anymore using that particular plan. The old backups will be available, but new backups won't be made using those settings. Of course, if you moved it to a container that belonged to a different plan, that VM will be backed up with that container's policy. You can also choose to exclude VMs within a container. So you might say, back up this particular ESXi server, but I don't want you to back up these 2 or 3 particular VMs as an example. Now in my lab, I don't have a vCenter and I've only got a single standalone ESXi host. So I've got a screenshot here of an example of a bit more comprehensive VMware environment than I have. But that said, let's go ahead and take a look what it would look like and how you'd actually set up the plan. So again, let's bring up the UDP console. Let's go to the Plans section and add a new plan. So let's call this VM Auto Protect Demo Plan. So the task type needs to be a host-based agentless backup. And just like before, we need to use a proxy. Now with VMware, there's a few different ways and a few different places where the proxy can actually reside. So I've already got one set up as another VM called UDP proxy. Now in the past, when we go add, when we add in nodes from VMware, we could only add those VMs themselves. I'm going to connect into my ESXi host. And again, keep in mind, when doing an agentless backup of VMware, we're leveraging VDDK, so it must be a licensed version of VMware. And you'll notice here, I can select the ESXi host itself. Now, I don't want to protect Demo 03. I'm using that for a different purpose. Ubuntu here is protected by a different plan. Proxy here is protected by a different plan. And this is a virtual standby. So I don't want to protect any of these. But you'll notice I still have the tick next to the ESX01 host. What this means is if any new VMs are created on this host, they will be automatically protected based on the policy that I set in this plan. The rest of these settings are the same, so we can perform the agentless backup and do the quiescing with VMware tools and so on. Destination here will be to a recovery point server. It'll be my deduplicated one. I can set my schedule, so I can choose what policy and how often I want backups to run, just as a normal backup plan before. If I wanted to add a task to do replication or any other actions after that, I can do that as well. I can hit save, and that's all there is to it now. If I create any new VMs, they'll automatically be protected using that particular plan, and the way to restore them will be exactly the same as it's been in previous versions of UDP. The big difference with 6.5, or an additional benefit, is if I'm doing a file restore from an agentless backup, I no longer need to have an agent on the VM to do the restore. I can restore into the VM directly without that agent. Lastly, let's take a look at the assured recovery testing. Again, this is a really beneficial feature because what we can do is, after we've done our backup into the recovery point server, we can stand up that recovery point as a VM or as a virtual disk and attach it to another machine and perform checks on it. We have the ability to run custom scripts, so we can check if services are running, we can do checks on data, if particular folders or files are there, and so on. And the results of these can be plugged into and available within our SLA reports. So to do assured recovery testing, again, let's go back into the console. And what we're going to do is, again, we're going to create a new plan. And I'm going to call it AR test demo. And I'm going to add a new machine. I have a Demo 01 machine, which is an agent-based Windows box. So I'm just going to add this in. Now, this first part of the plan that I'm setting up is just a standard backup. So you need to have a standard backup run so that you can then use the recovery point from that backup for the assured recovery test. This Demo 01 is a vanilla Windows install. It just has a C drive. Destination is fine. It'll go to RPS1 deduplicated data store. I'm happy with the schedule. That can just run as is. I'm not changing anything here. Now to do assured recovery, what we do is we add a new task. And you may have seen in one of the drop-downs we did a little earlier, but assured recovery test is now an additional task. So I click on this, the source, which recovery point do you want to test? Well, I want to test the latest one. So whenever there's the latest backup, I want to test that. Under test settings, we're going to choose whether we want to create a full standalone VM out of it, or whether we just want to create a virtual disk and do like a check disk or other checks on the file system. I want to do an instant VM, and I can choose to do that on vSphere or Hyper-V. I'm going to do it on Hyper-V, and I'm going to do it on VM01. I know that I have resources available there for this. And just like standard instant VM, the proxy server, in the case of Hyper-V, must be the Hyper-V host that you're standing the VM up on. In the case of VMware, it can be the RPS or it can be a different Windows server. So that's automatically selected for me, and you can see I can't change it. Then I have some settings here. What do I want to prefix for the instant VM? I then need to choose where am I going to have my differencing disk. So on VM01, I think I have a folder I've created before for instant VMs, which I have. So I'm just going to select that folder. You can choose how much RAM you want to give it. So I might give this 2 gig of RAM. And then you have options to connect to a network or not. By default, it won't connect the VM to a network so that you don't get a clash. I can tick this, but I've only got one network configured. If I had multiple vSwitches or multiple networks, maybe I could connect it to a network that was a segregated network that I can use for sandbox testing. And you can choose whether you want IP address through the backup or to use DHCP to assign the IP. In this case, I don't want to connect it to my production network, so I'll leave it disconnected. We then go to schedule. Just like the replication, when it's blank, it means that assured recovery test will start immediately after the backup completes. So I'm happy with that. And under advanced, I can choose my timeout properties. If I want to run a custom script for testing purposes, I can define that here, and I can set up email alerts. Once that's done, I can hit save. And again, it'll deploy that setting, and when the backup runs, we'll see it. In terms of the reports, if I go to the reports tab here, I have these new service level agreement reports. So I'll have the recovery point objective report. This is the one that shows how old my recovery points are, the oldest, the newest, and how many I have. And along with the graph, I actually have a breakdown of all the different sources and how many recovery points I have with the oldest and newest date. So I can generate a report and see a list of all of that. The recovery time objective report is the graph that shows whether you've met the SLA, the SLA that you've defined in the profile. So you can see here, I don't have a profile defined for all of my machines. I do have profiles assigned for some of them. And you can see here, it tells you how long it actually took to do the task. So for this Ubuntu machine, it took 11 minutes to recover the entire VM. This SQL server, I created an instant VM from a backup in 1 minute. My SQL server, I did an assured recovery test in 1 minute. Let me see if I have, I've got a file server here. I did a file restore from my file server, and that took a minute. So you can see it met the criteria that I had set based on those SLA profiles. Speaking of which, if you want to create those profiles, we'll go back to the Resources tab, and then right at the bottom there's an SLA profile section. And here I've got one already defined, but let's create a new one. We'll create an SLA profile. You can give it a name. And then you can choose how much time you want to set, or what your RTO is for each of these types of restores. So assured recovery test. I want to make sure that my VM is up and assured recovery works within so many minutes, hours, or days. Maybe I have a 5-minute for assured recovery test. Virtual machine recovery. Well, maybe I want a virtual machine to be recovered in 1 hour. Instant VM. Maybe I want an instant VM in 15 minutes. File restore. Well, I need a file restored within 5 minutes. Bare metal restore, maybe I'm a bit more lenient, maybe I can have 4 hours for that. And then you can choose what source machines you want these profiles to be assigned to. So maybe I want to assign this to my domain controller and my Exchange server, and we can add those in as an example. You can hit OK. And whenever you run a restore or a test on the machines within the profile, they will be added to the dashboard and into the reports. So the new features that we've added in, as you're probably aware, we have a number of different editions of Arcserve UDP. So we have Standard, Advanced, Premium, and Premium Plus. The ability to back up file shares from UNC paths is available across the board, from Standard all the way up, and of course available in the appliance as well. The auto VM protection is available from Advanced up, and the appliance itself ships with an equivalent license to Advanced. So whatever is in Advanced and higher is in the appliance, or whatever is in Standard and Advanced is in the appliance. Support for the Oracle Unbreakable kernel and support for virtual standby and instance VM into Amazon is also in Advanced. And just like in UDP version 6, hardware snapshot support is available in Premium and Premium Plus. So the fact that we've added vendor support doesn't change that. It's just hardware snapshots in Premium. And if you have the appliance, you can upgrade the appliance to Premium or Premium Plus, so you can get that hardware snapshot support. And same for the assured recovery test. The ability to do that automated testing comes in at the Premium level. So if you have an appliance and you want to do that assured recovery testing, that's fine. We can upgrade the appliance to Premium Edition as well. I did touch on before for Office 365, if you have a capacity license, it's included. Otherwise, we have subscription licenses, and they're available in 10 user packs in 1 year and 3 year subscription options. That pretty much covers today's session. We're running a little over time, but that's okay. We're almost at the end. Join us for the next webinar where we'll go through some of the other features, such as copy recovery, point to cloud, virtual standby into AWS, and so on. That'll be in 2 weeks' time, same place. There is a different registration link though, so if you want to register, if you haven't already, feel free to follow that link. And again, that webinar will be recorded as well and made available afterwards. If you're interested in any more information, if you want to deep dive, get more detail, or more, if there's any technical or sales or licensing related questions on UDP, RHA, or Arcserve backup, do feel free to reach out and contact us. The contact details are there on screen, and I'll leave that up there and basically jump to any questions that there might be. I can see there's a question about Arcserve accessing user mailboxes. So basically, we're using the proxy to do the connection into Exchange to Office 365 to the Exchange Online environment. In terms of journaling, no. What we're doing is essentially using our agent on the proxy to be the mechanism to get the data from Office 365 into the recovery point server. So it's a different way to how we do Exchange on-prem backup. So there's a question about file shares. So if I have multiple shares on a single NAS device, how does that work? The answer is we can definitely do that. From a licensing standpoint, if you have multiple shares going from the same NAS device, if the source device itself is the same, that will only use the one license if you're using a socket-based license. And you can have multiple shares, that's not a problem. Can we do online SharePoint? At this stage, no, but that is a feature that will be coming. Assured recovery reports, there's a question about that. So the question is, can those assured recovery reports or the SLA reports be scheduled and sent out? Yes. So with UDP 5 and 6, we've been able to set up a schedule so that an automated report can be generated and sent out based on a particular schedule that you set, whether it's daily or weekly, whatever it might be. So if you're providing a service for customers, if you have those SLA reports, you can have those be generated automatically and sent to you daily in the morning, maybe 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you can review those and send those on to customers as additional evidence that the test's been made. This is how long it took, and the machine stood up fine. All right. I think we have gone a little bit over. If there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you for attending today's session. If you do think of any other questions later on, again, please feel free to reach out. We will make the recording link available for this soon. And again, if you had any colleagues that that had other things come up and could not attend the webinar, please feel free to share the link with them. And until next time, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.